The town said Ethan Walker inherited a decaying lodge and a past he should have left buried. But they weren't there the night Boone. Old scars, sharp instincts, and a heartbeat that refused to quit dragged him toward a secret the entire valley had spent 40 years pretending didn't exist. By the time anyone realized what the dog had uncovered, it was already too late to deny. Some truths don't stay buried, not when a loyal soul decides to dig them up. They said Ethan Walker was out of his mind for coming back, the veteran who didn't know when to quit, the man who traded medals for silence, and now for reasons no one understood, had inherited a collapsing lodge on the northern edge of Pine Valley. If the cold didn't bite first, the town's laughter would. Pine Valley had a way of mocking without raising its voice. A look, a smirk, a whisper that pretended to be a greeting. Ethan felt every one of them as his truck rolled down Main Street, snow cracking under his tires. He kept his jaw tight, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting on the shoulder of the only companion he trusted. Boone sat tall in the passenger seat, ears high, amber eyes locked on the world outside. 7 years old, retired military canine, a beast carved from discipline and instinct. His scars were maps of old battles. Some Ethan had given orders in, some he wished he could forget. People at the diner window paused their coffee cups when they saw the truck. The same truck that had left Pine Valley years ago, carrying a soldier headed for a different kind of winter. A man near the gas pumps shook his head. Another murmured, "That Walker kid still thinks the world owes him something." Someone else said, "More like he still owes the world." Ethan pretended not to hear. Boone didn't. The dog's tail stiffened, his posture alert, ready to step between Ethan and whatever tried to resurrect the past. "Easy, boy," Ethan whispered. "They're not worth your breath." He turned off the road and began the slow climb toward the ridge. The lodge came into view only when the trees parted. Maple Ridge Lodge. Or what used to be. The roof sagged under snow. The porch leaned like it was tired of holding the place upright. The sign above the doorway swung weakly in the wind, its paint chipped to near nothing. But it was his now, for better or worse. A legacy from Uncle Samuel, a man who'd always kept secrets tucked behind half smiles and unfinished stories. Ethan killed the engine. Silence fell like a weight. Boone jumped down first, paws pressing deep into fresh snow. He paused, nose lifted, passing the scents the same way Ethan had once scanned sniper angles. Cold air, pine sap, rust, and something else, something that made Boone's ears snap forward. Ethan stepped out, boots sinking. The cold rose through the soles as if trying to claim him back into the ground. He studied the cabin, the cracked boards, the windows sealed with old plywood, the way the surrounding trees leaned, inward like they'd been watching the place for far too long. "Well," Ethan muttered, "this is home." Boone's tail swayed once, a patient agreement. Ethan made it 3 steps toward the porch before Boone froze. Not the curious kind of freeze, the operative kind, shoulders locked, head dropped, breath held. Then Boone trotted to the back of the lodge, paws cutting a direct line through snow that hadn't been touched in months. "Boone, heel." Ethan's voice was sharp, instinctive. Boone ignored him. Ethan followed, his breath crisp in the air. Boone was already digging, claws slicing the snow with a speed Ethan hadn't seen since their deployment years. Snow flew behind him in steady bursts. Like he wasn't digging for scent, he was digging for certainty. Ethan knelt beside him. "What do you think you smell? Animals don't bury things in metal." Boone's pace quickened. A moment later, Ethan's glove hit something hard. A dull clank, but unmistakably man-made. He wiped the snow aside. A steel latch, frozen, old, hidden so deep even decades of winter hadn't pushed it free. Ethan brushed more snow. The latch connected to a square outline, barely visible beneath the ice. A door, a hatch, built into the ground. Boone let out a single bark. Not excited, not afraid. Directive. The same bark he once used when explosives were within 12 feet. Ethan's pulse sharpened. He gripped the latch, tugged. It didn't give. The metal was welded by frost and time. His fingers trembled against the cold. "What the hell is this, boy?" Boone answered by stepping back, watching him with that unnerving, deep, canine intelligence. The kind that always meant he knew more than he was allowed to say. A crack echoed somewhere behind them. Ethan spun. A pickup truck idled just beyond the tree line. 2 local men leaned out the window, steam rising from their coffee cups. One called out, "You fixin' to haunt that place or freeze in it, Walker?" The other laughed. Guess the army forgot to teach him about property value. Ethan didn't reply. Boone took 1 step forward, and the men immediately rolled up the window. The truck backed away. Ethan turned back towards the hatch, but a flicker of movement caught his eye. Boone wasn't looking at the hatch anymore. He was staring toward the porch, fur raised, eyes hard. Ethan followed his gaze. Someone had been there, a footprint, fresh, not theirs, leading from the porch toward the tree line. Only one, deep enough to mark urgency. Light enough that it wasn't retreat. Someone had been watching the lodge, watching Ethan, maybe watching Boone find the hatch. The air grew colder, the silence heavier. Ethan crouched beside the footprint. Boone's breath warmed the space between them. Whoever it was didn't want to be seen. Ethan murmured. Boone lowered his head, nose brushing the snow. Breath held. The dog was reading the world the way Ethan used to read enemies. Then Boone growled, not loud but low, deep, a sound anchored in memory of danger. Ethan stood. The lodge loomed behind them, its windows like dark eyes that had witnessed too many winters and held too many secrets. Boone stayed at his side, rigid, waiting for Ethan to decide what came next. Ethan stared at the footprint, then the hatch, then the valley below. He whispered, more to himself than Boone. "Looks like we inherited more than an old lodge." Boone didn't move, didn't blink. He simply breathed once, steady and certain, as if confirming what Ethan already felt. Something beneath the snow had been waiting for them, and it wasn't done waiting. The lodge smelled like old paper and colder years, the kind of cold that didn't leave even when the fire was lit. Ethan stepped inside with Boone close behind, the dog's paws silent on the warped floorboards. Snow clung to Ethan's jacket, melting in slow beads that disappeared into the dusty wood, like the place was swallowing every trace of warmth it could steal. Only one lantern worked. Its faint glow pushed shadows across the walls, revealing sagging beams and shelves that hadn't been touched since Samuel Walker was alive. Ethan dropped his duffel near the door and exhaled. He had been trained for hostile villages, for ambushes at midnight, for landscapes filled with danger. But this lodge felt heavier than any battlefield. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. Boone padded forward, nose low, tail straight. His movements were different from earlier aggression. Now he was scanning, analyzing, searching for a scent too faint for Ethan to know existed. The dog stopped near the old stone fireplace. He nudged a loose board below the mantel. Ethan crouched, brushing off a layer of dust. Something was wedged behind the wood. A thin envelope, yellowed, edges brittle. His name was written across the front in Samuel Walker's sharp handwriting. He didn't need to open it to feel the chill that leaked from inside the paper. He tore it carefully. "Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Do not ignore what the dog tries to show you. This lodge was built for reasons that were never spoken in town. If you want to understand why it still stands, trust the one creature who doesn't lie. Trust the dog." Ethan inhaled, slow and uneven. His uncle had always spoken in riddles, but this felt different, urgent, deliberate. He read the line again. Trust the dog. Boone sat next to him, silent, watching him with that burnished stare that felt too knowing. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. What did he know that Ethan didn't? The wind pushed hard against the windows. Something creaked inside the hall, long and low like an old house groaning awake. Boone stiffened instantly. His ears shot forward, his body turned rigid, muscles flexed. Then he walked away from the fireplace and planted himself near the center of the room. Head lifted, nose twitching. Ethan frowned. What now? Boone lowered his muzzle to the floorboards. Then he pawed once, quiet but firm. Ethan moved, closer. The wood was aged but unremarkable. A faded rug sat rumpled at the edge. He peeled it back. The boards underneath were slightly darker, as if someone had replaced part of the floor years later. Boone's tail lifted, not wagging, just raised. A signal he used in Afghanistan whenever he detected something concealed underground. Sometimes it meant explosives, sometimes it meant remains. Ethan swallowed. This was a lodge, not a battlefield. He knelt and pressed his hand to the floor. Cold bled through the wood. Boone pushed his nose against Ethan's arm, urging him. All right, I hear you. Ethan whispered. He dug his fingers into the gap between two planks. One board shifted. Not much, but enough to confirm it had been lifted before. Someone had used this spot. Someone had put something down there. A sudden thud hit the roof, snow sliding off. But Boone didn't flinch. His eyes stayed locked on the loosened plank. Ethan pried it up a little more. A hollow echo answered. But before he could open it further, a loud knock shattered the silence. Boone spun around, teeth showing. Ethan grabbed the lantern and stood, heart pounding. Another knock. Not gentle. Not patient. Ethan approached the door slowly. Boone slid in front, shoulder pressed against Ethan's knee, ready to launch. Ethan cracked the door open. A woman stood in the snow, wrapped in a thick jacket, cheeks flushed red from the cold. Her eyes were sharp and serious. Not local. Not familiar. I'm looking for Ethan Walker, she said, breath rising in clouds. Who's asking? My name's Claire Hutchins, county assessor. I'm here for a signature. She held up a clipboard, but her hand shook slightly. Not from cold. From nerves. Ethan narrowed his eyes. They send assessors up here after dark now? She hesitated, then said, I didn't exactly volunteer. Boone sniffed the air and took a step forward, body tense. Claire glanced at him, startled. That him? The dog? Ethan didn't answer. She shifted her weight. Look, Mr. Walker, people in town talk. They say your uncle was mixed up in something out here, something that wasn't in the files. They asked me to check if... She lowered her voice. The place is safe. Boone growled softly. Ethan opened the door wider. You can come in, but only if you tell me who sent you. Claire stepped inside, brushing snow from her shoulders. Her eyes scanned the lodge quickly, almost too quickly. She was looking for something. Or someone. I'm not supposed to say, she murmured. But a councilman pushed for it. Harlan Pierce. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Boone growled again, louder this time. Claire flinched. Is he trained to do that? He's trained to tell the truth, Ethan said. Boone moved toward the center of the room again, then froze. His body lowered, ears high. He stared at Claire. Not suspicion, recognition. Ethan stiffened. Boone only reacted that way to one kind of scent. Chemicals. The kind used in storage facilities or old equipment. Not something a county assessor should smell like. Claire took one cautious step back. Ethan's voice sharpened. Where were you before you came here?" She hesitated. "I told you. County office." Boone growled. It wasn't a warning, it was a verdict. Ethan stepped forward. "Try again." Her jaw tightened. She looked at Boone, then at the plank Ethan had pried up. Her eyes flickered. Then she exhaled sharply. "Fine. I wasn't sent to check the lodge. I was sent to see if you'd found anything." Ethan's stomach dropped. Claire continued. "Harlan Pierce said your uncle hid government materials in this lodge. Old Cold War stuff. He said if you stirred it up, things would get dangerous fast. For everyone." Ethan felt the wind change outside. Boone pressed closer to him, ready. Before he could respond, the lantern flickered. Then the floor beneath Boone's paw gave a small, unmistakable pop. The board shifted fully this time, on its own. And the sound that rose from below wasn't the creak of old wood. It was metal striking metal. Boone barked once, direct, urgent. Claire went pale. Ethan froze. And in that moment, he knew two things. 1. His uncle hadn't lied. 2. Whatever was buried here, someone else knew about it long before Ethan arrived. Boone stood at the center of it all, eyes blazing, breath steady. The dog wasn't remembering. He was warning. The night in Pine Valley was the kind of cold that made the glass pulse. Ethan drifted in and out of sleep on the thin mattress, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like dust and old cedar. Boone lay near the doorway, motionless except for the slight rise of his chest. The dog never slept deeply. Not anymore. It was close to midnight when Boone's ears shot up. A split second later, he barked. Not a warning bark, not a curious one. This was the sharp, surgical bark he used in Afghanistan when he'd scented explosives, corpses, or danger that couldn't be seen yet. Ethan sat up so fast the room spun. Boone barked again, then scratched the floor, claws clicking with urgency. "What is it, boy?" Boone didn't even look back at him. He sprinted towards the kitchen, tail stiff, nose cutting the air like a blade. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and followed, boots half-laced. Boone reached the back door and stopped. He didn't bark this time. He growled, a low, vibrating sound that wrapped the room in tension. Ethan swung the door open cautiously. The world outside was buried in white. Snow drifted sideways under the moonlight, the trees bowing under the weight of the storm. But Boone shot out immediately, paws sinking deep, breath fogging around him. Boone cut to the right side of the lodge, following a scent line only he could detect. Ethan jogged after him, the cold burning his lungs. At the far corner of the house, Boone stopped abruptly, nose pressed against the ground. Then he began to dig. Not frantic, not confused, surgical, exact. Ethan felt his chest tighten. This was the same pattern Boone used when he located a buried device in Helmand Province. Same body angle, same controlled breathing, same precision. He flashed the light downward. Snow flew in sharp bursts behind Boone, revealing the wooden edge of something familiar. The same hatch they had partially uncovered earlier. Only now Boone wasn't digging at the snow. He was pawing at the wood itself, pushing against a corner so tight it shouldn't have given way. But it did. A soft click rose from beneath his paws. Ethan froze. That wasn't a natural sound. That was mechanical. He knelt beside Boone and pressed his hand against the wood. He pushed. A thin seam shifted under his palm. "You have got to be kidding me." He gripped the edge, braced his boots in the snow, and pulled. The hatch groaned like something exhaling after decades underground. A blast of cold air seeped up, carrying a smell Ethan knew too well. Earth, metal, and something faintly chemical. Boone backed up, but only far enough to let Ethan descend. The flashlight cut through the dark, revealing narrow wooden steps leading down to a small room. The walls were dirt reinforced with old timber. A workbench sat against one wall. Shelves lined with dust-covered crates filled the space. It looked untouched since the Cold War. Boone stood at the top of the stairs, watching, refusing to leave his post. Ethan stepped down slowly. The wood creaked under his weight. His breath fogged in the stale air. He swept the light across the room. That was when he saw it. A metal case sat in the far corner. Standard military issue. Rusted but intact. He approached and knelt, the cold seeping through his jeans. The latch was stiff, but it opened with enough force. Inside lay several objects wrapped in plastic, a faded notebook, a stack of folded maps, and a sealed envelope addressed not to Samuel Walker, to the one who stayed. A chill washed through him. He opened the notebook first. The pages were brittle, filled with tight handwriting. Coordinates, dates, lists of supplies. Then the tone shifted halfway through. Notes grew frantic. Words underlined. North Star Phase 2 incomplete. If the government abandons it, we safeguard it. Pierce disagrees, says bury everything. No trace, no record. Ethan kept reading, flipping pages faster. Last entry, December 2nd, 1983. Had to lock the second crate. They will come for it one day. If I'm gone, the dog will know. Ethan's breath stalled. The dog. Singular. Boone wasn't born until decades later, but canine lines were often bred from the same few military bloodlines. Rule was simple. Instinct travels further than memory. He set the notebook aside and unfolded one of the maps. Most markings were blacked out, but in the upper corner, written in faded red ink, was a project name. Project North Star. Ethan felt the ground tilt. He had heard whispers of North Star during briefings years ago. A Cold War contingency plan involving resource caches, encrypted supply points, and off-grid safe houses in mountain regions. Most files on it were destroyed or sealed, but Maple Ridge Lodge wasn't on any public file. Boone barked once, sharp and commanding. Ethan jerked his head up. The dog wasn't alerting to danger. He was alerting to movement above them. Footsteps, light, slow, not the wind, not the house settling. Someone was at the lodge. Boone growled and moved halfway down the steps, eyes locked upward. Ethan extinguished the flashlight, plunging the cellar into darkness. They listened. One step, another. A faint creak of a boot on floorboards. Ethan's pulse sharpened. Boone stayed perfectly still, but the air shifted around him like he was preparing for attack. Then the footsteps stopped. Silence. Ethan climbed back up with Boone glued to his hip. He reached the hatch and eased it shut, pushing snow back over it until it blended into the landscape. The wind covered the rest. He moved toward the lodge window, peering through the frost. No shadows, no figure, no sign of tracks. Whoever it was had either retreated into the trees or had never wanted to be seen in the first place. Inside the lodge, the room felt heavier. Boone scanned every corner, muscles tight, nose flaring. Ethan dropped the notebook, unfolded the North Star map again, and stared at the coded markings. If Pierce wanted to buy this lodge, he wasn't buying property. He was buying silence. Boone walked to Ethan and pressed his head gently against his forearm. Not comfort. A signal. They were running out of time. Ethan closed the map. Whatever Project North Star hid in these mountains, they were not the only ones searching for it. And Boone had just become the only guide through a secret someone was willing to kill to keep buried. The morning came in pale grey light, the kind that made the mountains look older and the world feel quieter than it should. Ethan barely slept. Boone didn't sleep at all. Every sound outside the lodge made the dog rise, ears forward, eyes sharp. Someone had walked the grounds last night, and whoever they were, they'd been close enough to hear Boone's bark before vanishing into the trees. Ethan warmed his hands around a mug of coffee and stared at the notebook again. The same name kept circling in his head, the one that appeared in almost every North Star entry. Pierce. It couldn't be a coincidence. By mid-morning he made his way into town. Snow fell lightly, but the cold sliced deeper than before. Pine Valley's streets were lined with old brick buildings and faded Christmas lights still hanging, even though the season had long passed. On the corner near the community center, a woman loaded books into the back of her car. Maya Ellington. He recognized her from years back, the teacher who ran the historical club at Pine Valley Middle. She'd always been the kind who saw more than people wanted to reveal. Boone trotted beside Ethan, scanning every vehicle, every doorway, marking each with the same silent vigilance he once used on patrol. Maya looked up and blinked in surprise. "Ethan Walker, I heard you were back, and with company." Boone stepped forward, not threatening, just assessing. Maya laughed softly and extended a hand. Boone sniffed once, then licked her glove. "He likes you," Ethan said. "That saves time." "What brings you here?" Maya asked. "You never drove into town unless you had to. I need your eyes on something." Her expression shifted. Serious now. She gestured for him to follow her inside the community center, where the heater hummed unevenly and the walls were lined with faded photos of Pine Valley's early settlers. They sat at a table near the window. Boone sat between Ethan's feet, gaze fixed on the door. Ethan opened the notebook and the folded map, careful not to draw attention from the few locals passing by. Maya leaned in, her brow furrowed almost instantly. "Where did you get these?" "My uncle's place." "The lodge." Maya's eyes widened. "Ethan, this signature, this isn't just some handyman scribble. This is Harlan Pierce." Ethan leaned back. Boone shifted, picking up the tension. "You know him? Everyone in town knows him." Maya tapped the page. But before he was the golden boy of Pine Valley, Harlan was one of the lead contractors for Cold War infrastructure projects. Army Corps of Engineers, mountain facilities, defense shelters. And he had his hands in half of the construction up in these ridges. Ethan felt heat rise behind his ribs. Boone sensed it and pressed gently against Ethan's boot. Maya continued. "If Pierce was part of whatever North Star was, Ethan, that means the lodge wasn't just a lodge. It was part of whatever they were building. Or hiding." Ethan nodded slowly. "Someone tried to break into it last night." Maya's eyes sharpened. "Did you see them?" "No, but Boone did." Boone lifted his head at his name, ears tilting forward. Maya hesitated, then asked the question Ethan dreaded. "Do you think your uncle was involved?" Ethan closed the notebook. Samuel Walker had been stubborn, reclusive, and secretive. But dirty? He couldn't believe that. Yet the evidence sat inches from him. "I don't know," Ethan finally said. "But I'm going to find out." Before Maya could ask more, Boone stood abruptly. He turned toward the door. His tail stiffened, his nostrils flared. Someone outside. Ethan rose instantly. Through the frosted window, he glimpsed a figure across the street. A man in a dark coat, standing too still, staring directly at the community center. Not browsing, not waiting, watching. Then the man turned and walked away without a word. Maya whispered, "That wasn't a local." Boone growled deep, a sound that curled through the room like smoke. Ethan grabbed the notebook and maps. "I need to go. Maya, can you compare the symbols on this map to the old mining and military records?" She nodded. "Bring me anything else you find. And Ethan, be careful." He didn't answer. The cold outside felt harsher as he and Boone headed back toward the ridge. Boone stayed close, but pulled ahead as they neared the forest. His pace quickened. His nose lifted. He caught a scent. Ethan followed him off the path and into the trees. The snow here was less disturbed, untouched since the storm. Boone's tail rose high. He pushed deeper, weaving through the pines, pausing only long enough to confirm whatever he smelled was real. They reached a clearing. Boone stopped dead at the base of an old spruce tree. Its roots were thick, frozen over with decades of mountain ice. Boone pawed the ground. Twice. Then again, more forcefully. Another signal. Ethan knelt. Under the ice a faint shape glimmered. Not rock, not wood. Something metallic. He pulled his knife from his pocket and began chipping away at the ice. Boone helped, using his paws to scrape loose snow. After several minutes, Ethan exposed the corner of a metal tube, no bigger than a fire safe. Frozen solid into the base of the roots. Ethan pried at it with the flat of the knife. The ice cracked. The tube shifted free. Boone stepped back, as if giving the object space. Ethan lifted it. The lid was sealed but dented, the paint chipped. When he managed to crack it open, frost vapor escaped in a thin, cold breath. Inside lay another map. This one smaller and more brittle. It showed the ridge system from a different angle, a network of tunnels and access points, and at the bottom corner a stamp identical to the North Star blueprint. But beside the stamp was an unfamiliar code. North Star Site 2. Ethan felt something sink inside him. The trapdoor at the lodge was only the first location. There was another, and according to the map, it lay deeper into the mountains, very close to where Pierce owned private land. Boone nudged Ethan's arm, eyes sharp with urgency. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. Ethan stared at the coded markings again. Maya was right. Harlan Pierce wasn't just a name on a document. He was part of the construction. And if the first trapdoor held Cold War evidence powerful enough to make someone stalk the lodge at night, Site 2 could hold something much worse, something someone was willing to kill for. Ethan folded the map carefully. Boone stayed at his side, breath steady, waiting for what came next. "We find it," Ethan murmured, "before they do." Boone lifted his head, snow dusting his muzzle, and took the first step back into the forest. The wind howled across the ridge that afternoon, sweeping thin sheets of snow past the porch. Ethan had just finished patching a broken shutter when Boone stiffened beside him, tail rigid, ears pitched forward. His growl rose low and steady, the kind he only used when something dangerous approached. A black SUV crawled up the frozen path. Only one man in Pine Valley drove a vehicle that clean in weather this bad. Harlan Pierce stepped out, brushing snow from his tailored coat as if it personally offended him. His smile was polite, almost warm, but his eyes carried a cold precision Ethan recognized from men who hid their intentions behind good posture and perfect grammar. "Ethan?" he called, voice smooth. "Figured I should stop by and welcome you home." Boone moved instantly, planting himself between Ethan and the visitor. His hackles rose, his teeth flashed, the growl deepened. Pierce froze mid-step. "I see the dog remembers me less fondly." Ethan placed a calming hand on Boone's neck. "He doesn't do that with strangers unless there's a reason." Pierce's smile didn't falter, but something sharp flickered behind it. He walked up the steps, hands spread in harmless greeting. "Beautiful place you've got here. Shame your uncle let it rot. But that's the past. I'm here to talk future." Ethan crossed his arms, saying nothing. Pierce leaned in slightly. "I'll make it simple. I want to buy this property." Ethan kept his voice even. "It's not for sale. Everything is for sale." Pierce reached into his coat and pulled out a check already signed. A number was written on it so large, Ethan almost laughed. "That much for a collapsing lodge miles from town." Pierce continued. "Pine Valley is expanding. Developers will pay triple what I just offered. But I'm giving you a chance to skip the hassle. Cash. No inspection, No paperwork headaches. Boone took one slow step toward Pierce. The dog's nostrils flared, and his growl sharpened into something deeper. Not anger, recognition, a scent he didn't like. One Ethan had heard him react to only around explosive residue or industrial chemicals. Pierce caught the shift. "What's with him?" Ethan replied quietly. "Boone knows what he smells." Pierce's expression tightened for the first time. He slipped the check back into his coat. "Think it over. Offers like this don't last." He stepped off the porch, boots crunching in the snow. Boone tracked him with unblinking eyes until Pierce climbed into his SUV and drove away. Ethan watched the vehicle disappear around the bend. He didn't need Boone's reaction to know Pierce wasn't here for property. The man had been too interested in the lodge, too nervous around the dog, and far too fast in offering money. Ethan looked down at Boone. "You smelled him before, didn't you? In the lodge? The person walking around last night?" Boone bumped Ethan's leg, confirming it. Night fell early, swallowing the ridge in blue shadows. Ethan reviewed maps with Boone sleeping beside him, though the dog wasn't truly asleep. Every few minutes his ears twitched, registering sounds Ethan couldn't hear. Around 9, he rose suddenly. "Head up, nose sharp to the door. What is it now?" Boone didn't bark. He walked to the back door, pushed it once with his paw, and looked back at Ethan. Insistent. Ethan grabbed his coat, flashlight, and followed him outside. The cold hit like a blade, but Boone moved through it like he didn't feel a thing. He navigated the trees with purpose, weaving between trunks, following a scent only he could interpret. They moved deeper into the forest than before. The moon lit patches of snow, silver white. Branches cracked underfoot. After 10 minutes, Boone stopped so abruptly, Ethan nearly stepped over him. The dog lowered his head to a snow-covered mound near a cluster of boulders. His breath quickened. Ethan knelt and brushed away the snow. A metal hinge glinted. A second hatch. Unlike the first one, this one was reinforced with steel edges, marked with faint military etchings worn by time. Ethan ran his glove over the surface, the cold bit straight through. Boone circled the hatch, nose pressed low, as if confirming there were no immediate dangers around. He barked once, short and sharp. Ethan understood. "Open it." He pulled at the latch. Frozen solid. Boone stepped back, then rammed his shoulder against the side of the hatch. A dull thud echoed. Ethan shoved his boot against the edge, applied pressure, and finally the seal cracked. The hatch lifted slowly, groaning under decades of ice. A rush of stale air drifted out. Ethan lowered the flashlight. A ladder descended into a narrow chamber cut directly into the earth, reinforced by cement walls instead of wood. The difference was immediate. This one wasn't a makeshift cellar. This was engineered, purposefully hidden. Boone moved down the ladder before Ethan could stop him, landing with trained precision. Ethan followed. He swung the beam around the room. Stacks of crates lined one wall, all stamped with Cold War-era seals. Papers lay scattered on a metal table, preserved only because the cold had frozen them into stiff sheets. A small filing cabinet stood open, its contents half pulled as if someone had searched it years ago. But the centerpiece was a steel case in the center of the chamber. Boone sat beside it, tail still, posture alert, waiting for Ethan. Ethan knelt, heart pounding. He unlatched the case and lifted the lid. Inside lay several gold reserve bars, government issue, untouched, and below them were files stamped with military insignias, pages marked with redacted lines and coded signatures, and at the very bottom a folder labeled with a date, November 12, 1983. The headline read, "Engineer missing near Pine Valley. Investigation closed." Below it was a photograph of a man Ethan had never seen. According to the file, The man had vanished while working on mountain infrastructure assignments. The name jumped out like a punch. Oliver Kane. Maya had mentioned him, a contractor whose disappearance had been chalked up as an accident. But the file told a different story. Kane had tried to expose something about Project North Star, something tied to the hidden caches, something tied to Pierce. Ethan closed the folder slowly. Boone nudged him once, reading the tension in his breath. "We're not dealing with a forgotten project, boy. Someone buried all this on purpose, and Pierce doesn't want anyone unearthing it." Boone pressed closer, his eyes burning with the same instinctive certainty he had used in war zones. Ethan stood, sensing the wind shift above ground. If Pierce tried to buy the lodge today, he'd be back. And next time, he wouldn't bring a check. He'd bring something far more dangerous. The storm rolled in without mercy. By dusk, the sky had collapsed into a roaring white wall, snow slicing sideways across Pine Valley, as if the entire mountain wanted to swallow itself whole. The wind rattled the windows of Maple Ridge Lodge so violently that it sounded like fists slamming against the wood. Ethan had just finished boarding the east-facing shutters when Boone's ears snapped upright. The dog's body stiffened, his pupils narrowing into sharp black points. He growled, the deep, resonant kind that traveled straight through the floorboards. Ethan knew that sound. Someone's here. Before he could reach for his rifle, the back window shattered. Glass exploded inward, riding a blast of icy air. 3 silhouettes stormed in through the whiteout, bundled in heavy winter gear, faces masked, movements coordinated and fast. Harlan Pierce didn't come alone. The first man swung a crowbar toward Ethan. He ducked instinctively, years of combat flaring awake inside him. Boone lunged, teeth finding the man's wrist before he could swing again. The masked intruder screamed, shaking his arm violently, trying to dislodge the dog. A second man raised a tranquilizer gun. "Boone, move!" But the dart flew before Ethan could reach him. It struck Boone in the flank with a dull thud. The dog stumbled, claws scraping the wood floor. Boone growled, swayed, but refused to fall. He turned his head, eyes blazing through the pain, and charged the man with the dart gun. He hit him hard enough to knock him backward into the dining table, splintering it on impact. Ethan barely had time to register the blow before a third man lunged at him. They crashed against the wall, grappling in the dim light, Ethan's shoulder slamming into a beam that sent pain streaking down his arm. He fought through it, landing an elbow into the man's ribs. The front door burst open then, wind hurling snow across the room like flying ash. Harlan Pierce stepped inside, not dressed like a businessman this time. Black tactical coat, gloves, a pistol hanging at his side. His smile was gone. "You should have taken my offer, Ethan." Before Ethan could respond, a voice shouted from the stairwell, "Ethan, behind you!" Maya had arrived earlier that day to help interpret the documents. She held a fire poker in both hands, knuckles white. One of the intruders turned toward her with a knife drawn. Boone saw him first. Even groggy, even hit with sedative, the dog launched himself off the broken table with everything he had. He slammed into the man's legs, knocking him over and dragging him across the floor, teeth locked into the sleeve of his coat. The knife skittered across the planks and disappeared under the hearth. Maya gasped, stumbling backward as Boone placed himself between her and the intruder. His body shook from the drug fighting its way into his. Bloodstream, but he held his stance, tail low, ears pinned flat, refusing to let her be touched. Ethan tried to reach them, but Pierce moved first, pistol raised. "Don't do anything stupid," Pierce warned. "I need the documents. And the gold. Nothing else matters." "You hired that team of engineers 40 years ago," Ethan said, voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Project North Star wasn't an accident. Those men died because of you." Harlan's jaw twitched. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And your uncle learned to keep his mouth shut. Shame you didn't inherit the same instinct. He gestured to his men. Find the damning files. Burn the rest. Snow poured through the shattered windows, chilling the air, sweeping across Boone's fur. The dog wavered again, but braced himself, refusing to drop. The sedative was winning, but Boone was fighting it with sheer will. One of Pierce's men lunged for the stairs. Mare swung the fire poker, smashing it into his shoulder. He yelled, grabbing her wrist, twisting it. She cried out. Ethan charged, slamming the man into a wooden support post. The two tumbled into the living room, trading blows in the dark as the storm howled outside. Snow swirled into the cabin, making every breath sharp and metallic. Boone staggered, his legs trembling, but he forced himself to move, dragging his body toward Maya. She fell backward, scrambled away from the intruder, reaching for her again. Boone leapt once more, his body weight knocking the man completely off balance. Ethan's heart pounded. Come on, Boone, stay with me, just a little longer. Pierce lifted his pistol toward Boone. Ethan froze. Don't you touch him. Pierce's voice cut through the storm. That dog is a problem, and problems get removed. Ethan lunged, tackling Pierce to the ground. The gun went off, the shot blowing a hole into the wall just inches above Boone's head. Snow blasted inward. The storm screamed louder, echoing the chaos inside. Pierce fought with surprising strength. His hand clawed toward the gun again. Ethan elbowed him across the jaw, sending the pistol skidding across the floor. Maya crawled toward the weapon, but one of the intruders grabbed her ankle. She kicked wildly, boots scraping on the wood, but he dragged her toward the broken door. Help her, Boone! The dog pushed himself upright, once more, visibly shaking now. He lunged with whatever strength remained, clamping onto the man's pant leg and jerking him backward hard enough to break his grip on Maya. She scrambled to her feet, grabbed the pistol and aimed with trembling hands. Stop! The intruder froze. Pierce snarled. She won't shoot. Boone growled in a low rumble that vibrated through the whole cabin. Try her, Ethan said coldly. She's braver than anyone you've paid to hide your crimes. Pierce wiped blood from his mouth, breathing hard. You think this ends with you two? The gold. The documents. Project North Star. You don't know how deep this goes. I kept my silence. The engineers didn't. That's why they're gone. And if your uncle had listened instead of burying the evidence, he'd still be alive. That was the final crack in the room. Boone, trembling but conscious, took one unsteady step forward. His eyes locked on Pierce with a clarity that sliced through the drug. Ethan didn't need to give a command. Boone rushed him. Pierce panicked, backing toward the broken window just as a violent gust of wind blasted inward. His foot slipped on the icy floorboards. Boone's weight collided with him, sending both of them crashing sideways. Pierce tried to grab the windowsill, but the snow and wind knocked his balance clean out. He fell backward into the raging white storm. Silence followed him down the ridge. Boone collapsed. Ethan lunged toward him, sliding to the dog's side. Boone's chest rose shallow and fast, pupils dilating, breath thin. Stay with me, boy. You did good. You did so damn good. Maya knelt beside them, tears mixing with melting snow on her face. He saved my life, she whispered. Outside, the storm began to swallow Pierce's footprints, covering the truth and the man who tried to bury it. Inside the lodge, Ethan held Boone close as the dog fought to stay awake. Ethan whispered into his fur, I'm not losing you. Not tonight. Boone blinked once, pressing his muzzle weakly into Ethan's palm. He had protected his people. Again. And the storm was finally beginning to break. At dawn, the storm finally broke. The world outside the lodge lay buried under a clean, untouched blanket of snow, glowing faintly blue in the early light. The silence was so complete, It rang in Ethan's ears. Inside, the cabin still trembled with the echoes of the night before. The shattered window, the overturned furniture, the spots of blood melting into the wood. Boone lay on a pile of blankets near the fireplace, his breathing steadier now, but still labored. Ethan knelt beside him, checking his pulse again. A faint tail wag brushed the floor when Ethan's hand touched his shoulder. "You held us together last night," Ethan whispered. "You bought us the time we needed." Boone blinked once, slow, proud. A low rumble echoed outside. Engines. Ethan stood, grabbing the emergency flare gun he had fired through the storm hours earlier. The flare must have punched through just enough cloud to be spotted. Snowmobiles emerged from the trees, headlights carving through the white haze. Behind them, 2 county sheriff trucks crawled along the barely visible road, chains biting into the ice. Sheriff Cole Younger stepped off the lead snowmobile, his breath pluming in the air. He was a broad man with a steady gaze, someone Ethan had known from childhood but hadn't seen since returning. Younger removed his helmet, his expression darkening as he took in the shattered window and the exhausted look in Ethan's eyes. "We got your distress signal at dawn. What the hell happened out here?" Ethan pointed toward the ridge. "Harlan Pierce. He brought men. They tried to destroy the lodge. They wanted the documents tied to Project North Star." Younger froze. "What documents?" Maya stepped forward, clutching a folder she had kept pressed to her chest all morning, refusing to put it down even once. "The ones your office sealed in 1984. The ones about the missing engineering team." A muscle in Younger's jaw twitched. He motioned to 2 deputies. "Get the medical kit. And someone called the feds now, not later. Now." The deputies hurried inside while Younger crouched near Boone. He took a tranquilizer dart to the flank. Ethan said quietly. Almost went down. Still didn't quit. Younger looked at Boone like he was seeing a soldier, not a dog. "Damn brave animal." Boone lifted his head, as if acknowledging the praise. Minutes later, federal SUVs arrived, engines humming low and controlled. Men in dark jackets stepped out, their boots crunching deep into the snow. One of them, Agent Morales, approached Ethan. "We've been tracking rumors about a missing Cold War asset. Your flare put you on our radar immediately. Do you still have the evidence?" Ethan motioned inside. Maya spread the documents across the table, the gold bars still tucked safely beneath blankets in a metal box. Morales' eyes widened. These were never supposed to surface. "You understand that, right?" Ethan kept his voice even. "These were never supposed to disappear, either." Agents began cataloging everything with swift precision. Photographs, maps, ledger entries, signatures from military contractors long dead, notes implicating those who had profited in silence. One agent paused at a file marked with Harlan Pierce's name. "He's the one who came after you." "He orchestrated the cover-up," Maya said, "and he murdered the engineers who found the gold." Morales exhaled sharply. "We had suspicions, but nothing concrete. This—" He tapped one of the documents. "This is enough to crack open 30 years of corruption." By late morning, deputies located tracks leading down a ravine behind the lodge. There, half buried in snow and tangled in brush, they found Harlan Pierce, alive but broken, legs twisted beneath him. He tried to speak, but the cold had stolen most of his strength. Younger stood over him, arms crossed. "Harlan Pierce, you are under arrest for attempted murder, trespassing, possession of stolen federal assets, and obstruction of justice. And that's just the start." Agents lifted Pierce onto a rescue sled, securing him with heavy straps. Even then, he glared at Ethan as if the lodge itself had betrayed him. "You should have let it die in the snow," he rasped. Ethan didn't respond. Boone let out a soft growl, one that carried no threat, only truth. By noon, the lodge was swarming with investigators. One approached Ethan with a camera. "Mind if we get a statement?" Word spreading fast. And well, he smiled toward Boone, who was resting near the hearth. "People want to know about the dog." Ethan didn't step into the spotlight, but he didn't push it away either. "I didn't uncover anything," he said. "Boone did. He never stopped digging. Not for treasure. For the truth." The agent nodded. "That'll play well with the public." An hour later, local news crews arrived, broadcasting live from the clearing. Viewers watched footage of Boone being checked by a veterinarian, wrapped in a blanket, eyes alert despite the sedative still lingering. "Hero dog saves 2 lives in Pine Valley assault," the reporter announced. "Former canine Boone leads investigators to Cold War gold cache and exposes decades-old cover-up." Boone tilted his head at the camera, as if unimpressed by the attention. That evening, after the last agent departed and the quiet returned, Ethan sat beside Boone again. Maya placed a warm blanket over them both. "You kept this mountain honest," Maya whispered, scratching Boone's cheek. "And you nearly died doing it." Boone rested his head on Ethan's knee, letting out a deep sigh, the kind that carried weight and relief and pride. Ethan stroked the scar along Boone's jaw. "The lodge is safe now. The truth's out. They can't bury any of it again." Boone's tail thumped once. Outside, the last officers drove away, their headlights fading down the path until only the soft glow of the lodge lantern remained. Ethan glanced around the room. The broken windows, the scattered snow, the bruises on his arms, Maya's bandaged wrist, Boone's shallow breaths. Everything hurt, but everything mattered. Justice had finally reached Pine Valley, and it started with a dog who refused to stop digging. 1 year later, the mountain no longer felt like a place people whispered about. Maple Ridge Lodge stood solid again, its roof repaired, its porch leveled, its windows warm with steady light. The scars of that winter night were not erased, but honored. Some boards remained slightly darker where fire embers had once landed, and Ethan left them that way. Memory was part of the foundation now. Pine Valley Veteran Retreat. The carved wooden sign hung above the door, simple and honest. Veterans from every corner of the county knew the name. Some arrived broken. Some arrived silent. Some arrived angry at a world that had moved on without them. All of them found the same sight waiting inside. Boone. He had grown softer around the muzzle, streaks of silver touching the dark fur along his neck, but his eyes still carried that steady amber resolve. The first time he padded across the rebuilt lodge floor with confidence in his step, Ethan realized this place wasn't just his anymore. It was Boone's, too. On Wednesdays, the retreat held open hours. The fire snapped quietly as veterans gathered around the long table. Boone made his rounds, nudging chairs, laying his head gently on a shaking knee, pressing into someone's side until breath grew even again. He seemed to know who needed him before they said a word. Ethan watched him from the kitchen doorway. "That dog reads souls," one Marine had whispered. Nobody disagreed. There was one afternoon Ethan would never forget. A young veteran named Carter arrived, shoulders hunched, hood pulled low, eyes darting like he expected something to strike. He stayed on the porch for nearly an hour before stepping inside. No one approached him. No one crowded him. Boone walked straight to him. The German shepherd sat, not touching, not imposing, just present. Carter's breath trembled. He folded to his knees, hands gripping Boone's fur as he sobbed into the dog's shoulder. Boone stayed perfectly still, absorbing every ounce of pain without judgment. Carter would later say that moment saved his life. Maya visited often. Her teaching schedule kept her busy, but she carved out time for the lodge. She had become part of its rhythm, helping Ethan organize reading nights for kids of local veterans, bringing food during the winter months, laughing softly when Boone tried to herd the children away from the fireplace like they were sheep. One evening, Ethan stood beside her on the porch, watching the sunset spill orange across the pines. The wind carried the distant echo of laughter from behind the lodge. Maya leaned her shoulder against Ethan's. "This place is different," she said quietly. "It feels like the mountain finally trusts you." Ethan let the silence settle before answering. "I didn't do it alone." Boone trotted towards them then, carrying a dropped glove in his mouth. He delivered it proudly, tail moving in a slow, steady arc, his way of telling them he was still on duty. Inside, the lodge smelled of pine cleaner, warm bread, and coffee that never left the stove. A wall near the entrance had become a memory board, photographs of retreat visitors, badges donated by service members, a framed headline from the year before, "Hero Dog Helps Expose Lost Cold War Operation." Most people admired the article because of the gold, the corruption, the cover-up that shocked the county. Ethan admired one detail the reporter added near the end. Boone did not bark for glory. He barked because someone had to tell the truth. Late one night, the lodge was quiet except for the low thrum of the heater and the empty creak of the rafters. Ethan walked down the hallway to check the rooms, making sure the last guests were settled. Boone followed, paws soft on the floorboards. In the second room, a veteran named Langley slept fitfully, body twisting beneath a tangled blanket. Ethan recognized the signs. Night terror coming on. Before Ethan could step closer, Boone moved forward, placing a single paw on the edge of the mattress, leaning in gently until his weight grounded the man. Langley's breathing slowed. Boone eased back, returning to Ethan's side. "Good work," Ethan whispered. Boone bumped his shoulder lightly in reply. There were small plot twists that came with this new life. Unexpected visits from journalists, a congressional aide reaching out about a bill that would fund canine therapy programs nationwide. Even a reporter from a national network asked for an interview with Boone, not Ethan. He turned them down politely. Boone didn't need fame. He needed purpose. But there was one surprise Ethan never spoke about. One evening, while clearing snow near the tree line, Boone stopped and nudged something buried deep beneath the ice. Ethan dug it out with gloved hands. It was an old metal dog tag, frozen stiff, the inscription barely visible. A name Ethan did not recognize, but one that belonged to a soldier listed as missing from the 1983 engineering team. Boone had found the last piece of an unfinished story. Ethan placed the tag inside a small wooden box and locked it away with the other recovered items. Some truths were meant for families, not headlines. Boone curled beside the fire that night, his breathing slow and even. Ethan sat near him, hand resting on his fur, feeling the quiet heartbeat of a dog who had held a mountain together. The storm had passed long ago, but its memory shaped every nail, every brick, every life inside Maple Ridge Lodge. And it was Boone who carried the legacy forward, one steady step at a time. Outside, the wind brushed through the trees, soft and reassuring, as if the mountain itself was whispering that the darkest winter was behind them. The lodge glowed like a beacon in the snow, a place to come home to, a place rebuilt by a man, a teacher, and a dog who refused to let the truth stay buried. By the following spring, Maple Ridge Lodge had settled into its new identity, not just as a refuge, but as the heartbeat of Pine Valley. The retreat thrived in a way Ethan had never imagined. Word spread quietly, respectfully, carried by veterans who found something here they didn't know they were missing. And just as often, it was the kids from town who wandered up the trail, drawn not by the mystery of the place, but by the dog they called the Ridge Guardian. Boone accepted the title with his usual calm dignity. Some days he moved slower, a hint of stiffness in his back legs, but his instincts never dulled. When the door opened each morning, he was there, greeting newcomers with a nod of his head and a look that said, "You're safe here." He had become more than a companion. He was a symbol, a living reminder that loyalty could outlast storms and secrets. Maya stepped naturally into her role at the lodge. She and Ethan worked side by side, turning the clearing behind the cabin into a space for workshops. Veterans came to learn carpentry and survival skills, and teenagers volunteered on weekends, learning everything from basic first aid to how to build a fire in the snow. Maya handled the classroom-style sessions, weaving history and writing exercises into the lessons, showing kids how stories could rebuild what trauma tried to destroy. On a warm Saturday morning, the clearing was filled with chatter. A group of high school students from Pine Valley had come for a workshop on local history. Their teacher had asked Maya for help, but the kids clearly wanted one thing more than the lesson: Boone. He stood in the shade of the lodge, letting 3 children braid wildflowers into his collar. He tolerated it with a patient sigh, but his tail thumped just enough for them to know he didn't mind. Ethan watched from the steps as Maya wrapped up a talk about the old engineering team that once worked in the mountains. She told the truth, not the rumor-filled version the town had whispered for decades. The kids listened without distraction, something rare for teenagers. When she finished, one boy raised his hand. "Is it true?" he asked. "The gold? The missing engineers? Was it really Boone who found everything?" Maya glanced toward Ethan. "Your best storyteller is right there." Ethan stepped forward with a small smile. The boy who had asked the question was no more than 12, freckles across his nose, wearing a jacket 2 sizes too big. His eyes were bright with curiosity, not gossip. "Come on," Ethan said, waving him over. The boy hurried up the steps, followed by a few others. They sat cross-legged on the porch while Boone flopped beside them, resting his chin on his paws. The boy spoke again, quieter now. "My dad said the whole town was scared of what you found, that it changed everything." Ethan took a long breath. Boone lifted his head slightly, as if listening. "What we found," Ethan said, "wasn't gold. Not really. The gold was just metal, heavy, cold, and the truth we dug up had been buried long before Boone and I ever got here. But what Boone did was different." The boy leaned closer. "So Boone really knew? That there was something down there?" Before Ethan could answer, Boone lifted his head fully and stared at the boy with a steady, amber gaze. The kid laughed nervously and petted his neck. Ethan smiled. Maybe he knew something was wrong. Maybe he just followed the scent. Or maybe dogs understand things before we do. He paused, his voice softer. "I like to think he wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for someone who needed help." A few feet away, Maya watched him speak, her arms folded gently, her eyes warm with something like pride. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from the edge of the clearing. Boone shot up, ears sharp, posture stiff. Ethan straightened immediately. The kids froze. But instead of danger, a familiar figure emerged. Sheriff Younger, carrying 2 boxes marked Historical Property of Pine Valley. "Thought you might want these," Younger said. "Declassified this morning. The last of the Project North Star files. Town Council wants them stored here, not in some basement archive." Ethan accepted the boxes. "You sure? This place is the reason the truth came out in the first place," the sheriff said. "And because folks around here trust you and him." He nodded toward Boone. The kids whispered excitedly. Boone sniffed the boxes, then gave a single, approving huff as if declaring them safe. Younger added, "There's something else. A local non-profit wants to fund a scholarship program for the kids who come up here, in your dog's name." The boy beside Ethan gasped. "A scholarship? Named after Boone?" Ethan looked down at the dog, whose tail moved in one slow sweep. Sounds like trouble, he said jokingly. Boone leaned into Ethan's leg, unbothered by fame. Maya joined them on the porch. "What do you think?" she asked. Ethan's answer was simple. If it helps someone find their way, then yeah, Boone deserves that. Later, after the students had left and the clearing fell quiet, Ethan sat on the porch steps watching the mountains turn gold in the afternoon light. Maya sat beside him, shoulder brushing his. Boone rested between them, eyes half closed, soaking in the calm. Ethan's mind drifted back to the boy's earlier question. Do you think Boone knew he was digging up something big? He hadn't answered then, leaving the moment hanging. Now, Maya murmured, you never told them the truth. Ethan glanced down at Boone. The dog opened his eyes, meeting his gaze with that same solemn steadiness that had carried them through storms and secrets. Some truths, Ethan said quietly. They're better felt than explained. Maya nodded, understanding without needing more. Boone let out a soft breath and placed his head on Ethan's boot, as if grounding the moment. And for a little while, the mountains held its peace, letting the legacy of a man and his dog settle gently into the future they had built together. The late afternoon sun cast long, warm streaks across the porch of Maple Ridge Lodge. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and the quiet carried that unmistakable peace that comes only after a stormed-through year. The lodge stood stronger than ever, rebuilt with steady hands and steady hearts. Veterans lounged inside, talking softly. Kids laughed somewhere near the tree line. And Boone lay stretched at Ethan's feet, the old shepherd's coat now salt and pepper, his breathing slow but steady. A car rolled up the gravel path, tires crunching over the thin frost. A young reporter stepped out, notebook tucked to her chest, voice gentle as she approached. Mr. Walker, thank you for agreeing to this. Ethan nodded, leaning back against the railing. Just keep it honest. Always, she said. Mind if we sit? Ethan gestured to the bench beside him. Boone lifted his head, watching her with those calm amber eyes that had startled criminals and soothed the broken in equal measure. The reporter flipped open her notebook. People still talk about what happened here. Not the treasure, not the arrests, but the dog. So I guess my first question is the one everyone wonders. Do you think Boone knew what he was doing that first night, when he dug under the snow? Ethan looked down at Boone. The shepherd blinked slowly, as if remembering, as if the memory still lived somewhere behind those steady eyes. Ethan lifted a hand and ran it down Boone's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the aging fur. He didn't dig for gold, he said quietly. He didn't dig for fame or glory. Boone dug because something was wrong. Something was calling for help. He paused, voice softening. He dug for the truth. The reporter lowered her pen, caught off guard by the weight of his words. She asked a few more questions about the lodge, the veterans, the programs, but her tone had shifted. Less like an interview, more like someone trying to understand something deeper than headlines. When she finally stood to leave, she crouched beside Boone. You're a good boy, she whispered. Boone nudged her hand, the gesture gentle and deliberate, as if granting his approval. The car disappeared down the path. Evening settled across the valley, tinting the snow a shade of gold just before dusk. Ethan sat there for a long moment, rubbing the ache out of his hands, watching Boone stretch and settle beside him with a small groan. You still keeping us in line? Ethan asked. Boone thumped his tail once. Old, tired, but unbroken. Maya stepped out onto the porch with 2 mugs of coffee. The workshops are full again next week, she said. 3 new veterans called this morning, and 2 families asked if Boone would be here. Ethan smiled. He's not going anywhere. Boone leaned his weight against Ethan's leg, eyes half closed in the falling light. The porch light flickered on, casting a warm glow over the old shepherd's face. Maya sipped her coffee. You ever think about how different things would have been if he hadn't dug that first night? Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the tree line where the snow had once hidden a truth the world had forgotten. He breathed in the mountain air, cold and clean. Boone didn't just change my life, he said. He changed what this place stands for. People come here because they believe in him. They trust him before they trust themselves. Maya nodded. I think that's the best kind of legacy. A small voice broke the quiet. Ethan? Boone? A boy from the valley. Tyler, the one who barely spoke when he first arrived months ago, stood at the foot of the steps. His hands were shoved in his pockets, and his breath puffed white in the cold. Can I sit with you guys for a minute? He asked. Ethan motioned him up. Boone shifted, making just enough room for the boy to lean against his side. Tyler breathed slow and steady, fingers buried in Boone's thick fur. He's getting older, Tyler whispered. Aren't we all? Ethan said. Tyler smiled faintly, and then, softly, asked the same question the reporter had earlier. Do you think he really knew? That night? What he was digging up? Ethan didn't look at Tyler. He looked at Boone. The shepherd lifted his head, eyes clear, unwavering, as if answering in a language only loyalty understands. Ethan finally spoke. Some dogs don't need to know the whole story. They just know who needs them. Tyler nodded, resting his cheek against Boone's shoulder. Darkness stretched across the valley, quiet and steady. The porch light glowed like a beacon, guiding lost things home. Ethan took a deep breath and looked toward the camera mounted over the lodge door, the small red recording light blinking softly for the retreat's online channel. He wasn't one for speeches, but tonight felt like one of those moments that hung in the air, waiting to be spoken into truth. If this story found you, he said quietly, it's because some part of you still believes in loyalty, still believes in the quiet heroes, dogs like Boone. They're out there every day, digging, searching, holding our world together in ways we don't always see. Boone nudged his leg, as if urging him on. Ethan looked straight into the lens. What's your story with a loyal pet? The screen door creaked open behind him. Warm light spilled across the porch. Boone settled his head on Ethan's boot, eyes closing as the night wrapped gently around them. Ethan reached down and stroked the shepherd's fur one more time. If this story touched you, share it, support it, help it reach someone who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe to the German Shepherd channel. These dogs don't ask for much, but they give us everything. The wind moved softly through the pines, carrying the final words into the quiet mountain air. He didn't dig for gold. He dug for purpose, and the world was better for it.